My name is Mark Williamson from Action for Happiness, and delighted to have so many of you with us for today's special event on the theme of self-care as part of our Self-Care September theme. Sorry for the slightly later start. We had a little problem with the chat, but I'm really happy to see that everyone is now back on the chat and greeting each other from all around the world. Thank you all for being here. And I'm really happy that today we're joined by Dr. Lee David. Lee, lovely to see you.
Hi, Mark. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure everyone joining has already had a chance to read up on you, but you are, of course, a GP by background and part of the NHS and involved in providing a range of support to do with mental health, which I'll let you say a bit more about in a moment. But just for everyone else's benefit, welcome back. We haven't done one of these events since before the summer. Brilliant to be back with this Action for Happiness community live. As always, folks, let's keep it friendly, supportive, relevant, and kind in the chat, which I know you always do. And you'll have a chance to ask your questions to Lee a bit later on in the event. And there'll also be lots of interactive stuff happening as part of our conversation. Lee's really, really practical in terms of her advice for how we can practice self-care. And I'm really excited we're going to be doing that together and hoping to benefit from that myself as well as part of this event. So we will have a conversation about a range of themes and also looking forward to involving you, but particularly excited to share the GROW model, G-R-O-W, which Dr. Lee is going to share with us a bit later on. But why don't we start, Lee, with a bit about you, the work you do, and what's brought you to being here today?
Yeah, great. So as you said, I'm a GP or a family doctor, if you're not from the UK. By background, I'm also an accredited cognitive behavioural therapist, and I've always just been so interested in people and what makes people tick and just hearing people's stories. And it's always such a privilege when you can hear details about people's lives and be able to offer support. And so I just really enjoy being able to combine them. I work as a therapist and I also support people through my work as a GP. And yeah, we are drawn from lots of different, so there's cognitive therapy and lots of different offshoots like compassion therapy and acceptance and commitment, and we try to weave it together to provide something that's practical. I'm really someone who likes to get things done quickly if I can, and so that's where the 10-minute idea came from.
Yes, I'm looking forward to talking about the 10-minute idea, but I think what's also really inspiring about what you're doing is it feels like you're providing a lot of support to other practitioners inside the health service at a time when it feels like people are under so much pressure with the relentless work that in fact we often forget about the mental well-being of the experts and the staff and the doctors as much as we do about the end the end user of the health service. Is that something that you feel is really important?
Oh, absolutely. It feels incredibly important for me to be able to give something back to support. There's some incredible, talented, hardworking, really dedicated professionals out there, and they are struggling with mental health and emotional well-being. And so to be able to support them and have that as my role, it feels very special to me.
Well, thank you for doing that. And there's a lot of love in this community for all the amazing health professionals that are supporting so many people in difficult times. And maybe this is a good bridge to, before we dive into your wonderful work, just to take a moment to pause and reflect about the situation we're in currently. I may have a slightly UK-centric focus, but of course, the world has been through a COVID trauma, which we're still only kind of coming to terms with, I think. There's a war going on in Europe for the first time in decades. It's leaving so many ripple effects and as well as direct challenges to people's lives. And now, of course, there's many other challenges around the cost of living and uncertainty and political upheaval. And of course, in the UK, the loss of the Queen, something that's been a figurehead that's been in all of our lives, throughout all of our lives, for those of us in Britain. So it's a time of great upheaval and change and uncertainty. What's your sense of, why that matters? Because at one level, we're getting on with our personal lives, but it feels to me like these big picture things do have a direct impact on us.
I think they really do matter. And I really do, we'll talk more as we go through about just being able to notice and acknowledge, what is it for me personally at the moment? How am I responding? Am I experiencing grief? Is it anxiety? Am I struggling with uncertainty about how the world is? The changes are so difficult to adjust to. Is there fear about the future? Am I sad about some losses that I've experienced? Because we all have so many different emotional responses, and we need to know what's going on for us as an individual so that we can respond to it in the most helpful way, supporting ourselves and supporting others, to be able to adapt and hopefully grow and find ways to cope with all of these huge challenges.
Well said. And well, on that topic of sort of really connecting with what's going on for us and just being, sort of able to notice it and to some extent accept what's going on, I wondered if I could invite you to maybe take us through a little grounding exercise. I know you have wonderful sort of practices of mindfulness and other forms of short therapeutic interventions. What could you do something that would help us sort of tune into what's going on for us right now, Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to invite you and everybody who's with us to maybe just close your eyes or just look down with a soft focus. Just settle yourself physically. Maybe let out a long, slow sort of sigh breath. Just noticing your physical body. Feel your feet on the floor, your seat on the chair. Just the weight of gravity bringing your shoulders. You might feel, as you bring your attention to your body, just a desire to move a little bit, maybe a sense of tension or tightness somewhere, and just letting that movement, a little bit of movement if that feels right. Just being aware of the movements in the body. Just noticing that you're here, that we're all here. We're all joining together for this talk today. And just noticing, what are you bringing with you today? What are your personal responses? What are your reactions? And just accepting whatever comes up with a kindness and openness, just a friendliness to our inner experiences. And maybe widening our awareness to notice how many people are here tonight, joining this activity. It's all about self-care, maybe caring for each other as well, connecting with our shared purpose together. Just pausing to recognize how hard it can be at times for so many people, for so many reasons. And yet amongst that, also allowing ourselves to feel connected, a sense of being connected to a community, coming together to support each other. And just finishing again with another slow sigh breath. And just one more. And just coming back. And it's quite a short practice there, Mark, and it's kind of trying to fit with the idea that even in a very short amount of time, you can find a sort of a message or a sense of stillness or a sense of spaciousness that can be really, really important.
Well, I agree, Lee, and actually in that short moment then can feel a sort of noticeable change in my own state of mind, from a sort of sense of slightly frenetic preparation to actually tuning back in and noticing a bit more about what's going on. So maybe we can invite people to share in the chat, just in a couple of words perhaps, so either how that was for you or something that came up for you in terms of an awareness of a physical sensation or an emotional sensation or something else that's on your mind. So over to you in the chat, folks. I'm seeing calming, more relaxed, more centered, relief, a moment of peace, relaxing, slower breathing, feeling grounded, sense of space, ordered thoughts, cleansing, less tense, and then lots of other things that I can't quite read as they're flying past. Presumably that connects in terms of what you tend to see in these sort of exercises, Lee. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And it just shows that, we don't have to. People sometimes get a bit thrown by the idea of mindfulness. It feels overwhelming, and actually it only has to be a few moments, and actually we can already start to feel a sense of peacefulness.
Yes, and I really like how this sometimes brings up physical things. Someone called Claire, I think in the chat, has just said, I didn't realize I had backache and now it feels more relaxed. And as someone who had backache for years, I can certainly relate to that sense of like almost being unaware of the experience I was having in my body and mind until I turned my attention to it. So we've obviously, the title of this conversation is Self-Care in 10 Minutes. And I know you've just shown us that we can do something sort of meaningful in a minute, but I would imagine you get quite a lot of challenges to this idea that 10 minutes is enough. You know, you've talked about your own clinical experience in terms of CBT and all these incredibly important therapeutic interventions that maybe take weeks. And yet 10 minutes feels much more manageable to many of us and is the sort of thing that we could potentially do every day. Would you want to say a bit about how you came to that 10 minutes and the importance of it?
Yes, well, and it's not to underestimate or undervalue the importance of therapy and having time for people who really need it. And yet we're all really busy, and finding time, to have self-care, but feels like time is such a precious commodity, and we're always so busy trying to fit in so many things in life, that we can get overwhelmed if self-care feels too big. And so I came at it from the idea of, well, little sort of chunks of time really can make a difference. And yes, you can build on them. So it's not like you have to end at 10 minutes. If something's really working for you, you can carry on. But it might be much easier to commit to something that feels only a few minutes long than something that feels impossible to get started with.
I think that's absolutely right. So I'm hoping we can get started with some new habits or some additional skills together today, because I know many people are here wanting to practice this in their own lives, but also wanting to share some of this wisdom with others that they care about. So I know you have this framework, which I think is GROW, GROW. Maybe you'd like to perhaps introduce us to what that means.
Yeah, so we call it kind of 10-minute grow, because there's other grows as well, and it's a 4-step approach with four, and the first step is following your inner guide, that's the G. Ready for action is the R, and then open and observe is the O, and then engage with your wise mind is the W. So we could talk through those and explain what they involve.
Yes. Okay. So let me see if I can recall what you've just said. So G is following you in a guide. R is being ready for action. O is about being open and observing, and W is wise mind. Did I get that right?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Okay. So yes, let's do that. Why don't we unpack each of those in turn? So let's start with the guide then. What's that all about?
Yeah. So your inner guide is about finding your values, what you care about. So it's connecting with who and what is most important to you, as a person, as a human on this planet, and the things in life that you really care about. So, it's big picture things. You can't tick your values off a to-do list. It's things like, and we're talking about self-care today. So it might be things like kindness or love or self-care. It could be courage, might be freedom. For many people, it's who we care about. So it may be family, friends, loved ones, connecting with people, maybe at work or in other areas of life, community. It also could involve things like being active, maybe outdoors, health, and also ranging, maybe fun for some people, creativity, being able to contribute in some meaningful way. Maybe it's the world, the environment, or your spirituality. And so the reason I'm giving a number of different is to just show the breadth of different types of things. And of course, many of us would say, well, I care about loads of those things. But what's often helpful is to focus for now, just at the moment, maybe over the next few weeks to months, which one can I pick a handful to focus on that feel like a priority? And it may be over 5 years, we will evolve. So we can change and shift and evolve our focus. But it's really helpful to think, okay, where am I at right now? What are my priorities? What values do I hold most dear? And
why don't we do this as a community just briefly now? I think I encourage people, as you say, to keep this going over the coming days and weeks, but take a moment, if you will, and you'd be willing to, just to share in the chat, what are one or a few of the things that really matter most to you, is the way Lee's described it there. I loved how you said kindness first in your list, Lee. That really resonated with me. So family, my partner, integrity, being empathic, my academic future, tolerance, my siblings, being kind to myself, I think I saw lifelong learning, nature, safety, dreams, helping others, the greater good, authenticity, kids, freedom, having time, spirituality, being compassionate, my health, self-belief, my wife, my daughter, creativity, balance, surviving, drawing, developing a family. Wow, I'm finding this list really moving actually, because they're
Mm.
at one level very simple, but actually really profound as well.
Well, it is really profound. And actually, I find that when you really connect with what people really care about, then that immediately changes something inside people, because it just creates a sense of purpose and meaning that was always there. It's not, it's actually, it's an authenticity. Someone mentioned that. And I think when you really connect with your values, it is about finding your authentic sense of who am I and who do I want to be and how do I want to be in this world. And it kind of helps us to do that in a really quite a deep way.
And I wonder if what you're doing with this, Lee, is helping us get out of what some people call autopilot. We spend a lot of our lives sort of charging around headlong, following other people's demands on us and sort of short-term sort of fires or immediate needs, and actually forgetting some of these things that really matter to us. So we might do things that are to the detriment of our family or our health or our belief in kindness because it feels urgent or because it's just come up. And so maybe what you're asking us to be is a bit more mindful, I guess, of the deeper things in the day to day. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. And having that awareness helps direct what choices we make. So it immediately creates a sense of choice, because if you really value creativity, for example, and you absolutely love music and yet never seem to find time to even the 5 minutes to connect with music in a way that feels meaningful, then that's a value that's not being lived. And so it's really, unless we know what our values are, then it's very difficult to make choices that are congruent with that.
Yes. So it's actually a way of sort of helping us fulfill our true potential in a way, to not ignore those bits of us that really matter. And I'm loving how many really deep and meaningful things are still being shared by people in response to that question. So do keep thinking about your inner guide, folks. But let's move on to the R. What's this ready for action? How do we put that into practice, Lee?
Yeah, so ready for action is, it links on to the values and your inner guide, because it's how do we actually start to enact, how do we start to make it a reality rather than a big idea that that doesn't meet fruition. What can we do? So ready for action is about planning, but also then carrying out actions. But I really like the idea of micro actions. And so this is back to the 10-minute thing, because as soon as people start planning to do stuff and then they say, oh, I'm going to go to the gym, I want to get fit, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. And of course, immediately you don't want to go to the gym. And, you might have a value of exercise and, self-care might look like physical activity, but yet we get blocks, things get in the way. And that might be a feeling of fatigue. It might be feeling demoralized. It might be feeling anxious, worried about people laughing at us. There's lots of reasons why we don't do the things that we would like to do. And often they're difficult feelings, or there might be negative thoughts, and they form a block. So we skip it. Maybe we don't go to the gym, and then we stay sat on the sofa. Maybe we end up scrolling social media, and then kind of the evening's gone by and we haven't done the things we really cared about, and we've lost connection with our values. So ready for action is about choosing some little micro steps that take definitely less than 10 minutes, because and ideally even just 2 or 3 minutes is the starting point. And you think, oh, that won't fix anything, but actually we're not trying to solve every problem with this micro action. What we're trying to do is to help ourselves break some of the autopilot habits that we've got into, where we're practicing making choices towards our values. So we're starting to make steps. We can think about towards steps and away steps. And towards step is taking an action that involves following our values, moving closer to our values, whereas an away step is trying not to feel something. So we might say, well, I don't want to feel anxious, so I'm not going to go to the party. but my value was connection, and now I'm missing my friends and I feel really isolated. So that's an away step. So what we're wanting to encourage is micro towards steps, so they don't feel overwhelming, they don't feel impossible, but they
I
are
think
towards
maybe
value.
what you're doing is, by turning it into a micro step, you're helping it feel manageable. But also, I think once we've taken the first step, we've almost got a little bit of momentum, haven't we? It's all that old saying of, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, sort of thing. So it's maybe creating a sense of like belief in oneself or efficacy that I can do something meaningful. So let's turn back to our community, shall we, Lee, and see.
Yeah.
Maybe I guess
So,
what we should be doing is bearing in mind the value that we've just thought about.
exactly. So if you think about the value, one or more of your values that you have picked as being relevant to you, and maybe what micro step, and remember it only needs to take, so it might be, I'm going to go for a 5-minute walk, I'm going to find my trainers in the garage and I'm going to get them by the front door. We don't have to commit to doing anything overwhelming. I'm going to text my friend for connection. It really only could be 30 seconds, but it's something that connects you to a value that you hold quite dearly.
Okay,
and preferably
folks,
within the next to the next couple of days as well. So we're not talking about next year.
yeah.
We really want you to do it soon.
So what is your next micro step, everyone, in the next couple of days? I'm seeing send my nephew a birthday card, listen to music more, eat grapes instead of chocolate, cut back on screen time. These are brilliant. Drive somewhere new, put the next load into the kiln, read more books, 10-minute Pilates, have a dance session, meditate more, healthy food, breathe more, take more photos, read a page before bed. I love the specificity of some of these. Say yes to bouldering as often as I can. Walk even just 5 minutes. Less late night snacking. Go to green spaces. Have a massage. Pick brambles. Listen to music and dance. Go to church. I'm feeling really motivated by these. How are you,
I
Cindy?
am too, and I really love the more specific ones. I'm quite a detail person, and some of them don't feel very micro. Some of them feel like quite a big ask. Yeah, like I'm going to cut down on long, and that feels hard. And so what I would say is, can you say on, I'm going to come home 5 minutes earlier tomorrow, and actually really make it quite specific and manageable, because I want to read more. It's such a lovely goal to have, but it feels a lot. Whereas I'm going to I quite listening to talking books. I'm going to listen for 5 minutes at bedtime tonight, to wind down, or I'm going to read a page. It's just trying to
I've
make
seen a
it
few
really
coming
achievable.
in. 10 minutes in the garden, read one chapter. I think these sort of things are really, really
They're
nice,
brilliant.
manageable. Very good. Thank you so much to everyone for sharing these. It really is both really enlightening to hear Lee's ideas come to life, but also actually, I think each of you is inspiring each other with these fantastic ideas as well. Okay, so that's G and R. Now we're on to O, open and observe. So what's that all about?
Right. So open and observe is about being more aware. So we already did a little bit of it, which is the grounding practice we did at the beginning. And it's just being a bit more aware of what's going on, both inside our body, inside our mind, and outside in the world outside. And just by creating that awareness, it creates a little bit more space, it creates a bit of room, a bit of choice. It's a bit like, I sometimes talk about being like a TARDIS. So we're trying to create room inside to have the difficult thoughts and feelings that are coming up, and to also recognize that's not all there is. And I've also got lots of, maybe there's some I can remember my values, I can remember my motivation, and also my body's here, so I can be aware of that, and that might help stabilize me. So it's really creating space to notice there's so much information going on at any moment, at any time, that actually it's how to make sense of that and use it in a way that helps us to live life in a way that's meaningful.
Well, I totally agree with that. So maybe, I love the grounding exercise. Could you perhaps lead us through another example of how we can bring that sort of openness and observation into our life right now?
Definitely. So I sometimes talk about noticing the now, and so it's just three little steps. And it's first is to just notice that you're having, that you're needing a pause for some reason. So it may be having a strong emotion, it may be, and then we move on to observing inside and out, and then we widen our perspective and think what's next. So I'm just going to lead us through
so Lee,
that.
before you do that, could I just encourage everyone, it's been fantastic to have this engagement on the chat. Why don't we let go of the chat for a moment and really be here together right now with Lee? So over to you, Lee. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's do a notice this moment. So if everyone, I'll invite you to maybe close your eyes or just look down and have a soft focus. And just take a slow sigh again, just to settle your body. Just engaging with your hearing for a moment and just noticing the loudest and the quietest sounds you can hear in the background. Maybe you can hear the sound of your own breath. Just noticing what you're touching with your body, with your hands, with your skin. Just noticing, are there any sensations in your body? Is there anything you need to pay attention to? Are you holding some tension in your shoulders that you could just let it go? Just noticing if you're sitting, leaning to one side, just bringing your stability, sitting nice and straight. Are there any emotions that you can notice right now? Is there any sadness or anxiety, irritability, or maybe contentment? Just noticing, where can you feel these in your body? And are you having any thoughts going through your mind? Any memories of things that have happened? Worries about the future? Planning? Thinking? Our minds are going all the time. Just noticing that's happening. Acknowledging, just greeting your thoughts in a friendly way. Oh, hello. Hello, worries. I see you. Okay. I'm not going to get caught in the story. I'm just going to notice that you're there. And then coming back to your purpose, what brought you here tonight? Remembering your values. Maybe you share some values of connection, being more mindful, practicing self-care or kindness. And maybe taking a hand and placing it on your chest. Or you might want to wrap both arms around you, whatever just feels more comfortable for you, whatever gives you a sense of being held, and just noticing the physical sensation, the warmth of your hand or your hands on your chest or your shoulders or arms, feeling that pressure. And maybe through your hands and arms, sending yourself a gentle well-wishing. Just wishing yourself well. May I be well with all the challenges that life brings. And maybe widening this sense of well-wishing to include everybody who's here tonight, everybody from all around the world. Just wishing well to all and knowing that we're all doing the same. May we all be well. May we find compassion, connection, and care. And allowing a slow sigh and coming back to the present moment.
Wow. Lee, I found that moment of sort of all of us around the world well-wishing to each other and out into the world really moving, really kind of electrifying, sort of shiver down the spine moment for me there. Thank you again. It's a real shift in awareness when you have a moment to pause like that. And thank you to everyone for sort of pausing on the chat, and look forward to hearing responses to that. So we've identified our values, we've thrown out a microstep. Would you suggest that that sort of practice of mindfulness is something that we try and do daily? And if so, how and when do you find that works best?
Well, I try and weave it in. So it's kind of what we need. Sometimes when you're feeling a bit frantic and life is running away with you, then you just need to do 30 seconds pause to just notice what's going on, doing that, noticing the now, like notice, oh, I'm having anxiety, I'm having stress, I'm having tension. Okay, I'm not alone in this. Okay, other people are, this is something that many people have. And breathe, and I can use my hearing, and I can maybe move my body a little bit. Okay, and then back to W, kind of widening the perspective on what's next. And the W is really important. It's like going back to the grow step, so that thinking about your the guide, and then what's the micro action that I want to do next, what's the most important thing for me to do, and can I do it with my full attention now, rather than getting caught up in the stories. It's now, so it's quite a practical, trying to come back to whatever it is we're wanting to do. So mindfulness doesn't have to just take you away and provide. It's obviously lovely when it's restful and peaceful, but it can also actually help us to engage and be actually part of living, which I think is also really exciting.
And sometimes, as you've just shown us so powerfully, it can be a way of connecting more with others too. And I feel a real sense of connection, partly because I shared how I felt quite emotional in that moment, but I've actually just seen in the chat a number of people saying that actually brought them to tears. And here we are in a happiness event making people cry, Lee. This is no, but it's something really powerful here, I think, about that.
Yeah.
Why is it that perhaps we have been blocking away some of those emotions, and in a moment like that, they can sort of emerge in a way that might be a bit unexpected?
I think there's so much going on under the surface, and that we, as humans, we have a tendency to kind of push through, when in doubt, just keep going. And it does work to an extent, because you get stuff done, but also we then just ignore some of the feelings that are going on, and they build up. And actually, when you do stop and go, how am I feeling? And wow, what's going on for me? Then it all comes out with this real sense of, and often it is underneath sort of being a bit frazzled or being a bit frenetic or tense. There may well be some sadness, and actually that's really important to connect with. Because that's quite a healing emotion. If we have that, it needs to be. I feel like there's parts of us that really want to be heard and frequently don't get a look in.
Indeed. And of course, those of us working in the sort of happiness and well-being space, I think, know that doesn't mean that there's no space for the negative emotions and the more difficult feelings. In fact, quite the opposite. The real lasting route to a fulfilling, happy life is the ability to embrace all emotions and to see what they're telling us, and to move on in a constructive way. So thank you for reminding us of that. And on that sort of wise theme, let's come to the W of grow, the wise mind. How do we build on those 3 steps in this last one?
Yeah, so and it's interesting that we've deliberately got the mind bit last, which is what people often think about with CBT, is sort of thinking rationally and sort of having a perspective. But once you have been more open and connected with your values, then the wise mind tends to bubble up anyway. We all have it. You can actually have a lot more trust in ourselves, that we have a lot of wisdom to offer, if we can just let that wise part of ourselves act as the guide. So I really like to use a parts idea of understanding how people have different types of emotions. So at times we have a part that might feel a bit depressed or low. We might have a part that feels anxious or fearful. We have a part that can be a bit critical, gives us a hard time, beats us up. But all of those parts have a role. The depressed part is saying, I don't overdo it, and I don't want to. And the anxious part's like, keep me safe, but we don't want to get into danger. And then the critic is, don't make mistakes. We really need to do well. Come on, don't. And so they all bring something very positive, and yet when taken to extremes, it can be very limiting for life. And so, rather than feeling like we have to eliminate these parts, or that there's a part of us that's wrong or broken, or that we should be trying to get rid of it, I really like to embrace it and actually feel like those parts, who are often quite young parts, actually, they need to be cared for and supported. And who takes the lead in caring support for all the parts that are struggling? It's our wise part. And so the wise part, our wisest part of ourselves, is a part that can see it, finds perspective on the world, sees the bigger picture, understands that the world's this really complicated place, and has the wisdom to recognize that things aren't as simple as we'd like them to be, and maybe has lots of compassion, is accepting of ourselves and others. And we all have that part, and it's often just giving that part more of a voice. And I often talk about encouraging that part to kind of be the leader. So that part manages, say, the anxious part with real kindness and love, but it actually also says, come on, we mustn't hide away forever. It's really important that we get out there and do stuff. And you know, the critical part, we might say, I really hear that you want us to do well, and I get that, and thank you so much for your efforts to stop me making mistakes in life. We also have to remember, though, we can't be perfect. It's not possible. So we just have to be balanced, and I'm here to help balance you and to remind you that you're doing a great job, and you don't have to strive for something that's not possible. So, you know, you can step down, have a sit down, have a cup of tea, have a rest, have a piece of cake, you know, have a break. And it's just this kind of being loving of all the different parts of ourselves. And so what I thought might be a nice way to kind of illustrate this wise part is I love imagery. And so I always invite people when I'm doing therapy to come up with an image that represents their wisest part, that they can draw on, that they can go to, and who just reminds you of, oh yes, that's the bigger picture, and oh yes, that's my kindest. And so just some examples that, you know, people I've worked with have used. It could be a person, it could be, you might have a loving grandparent, it could be the Dalai Lama or somebody, you know, a religious or a spiritual figure. But it could also be an animal. You know, people have used their pets. Pets are amazingly compassionate, wise, I find. It might be, I love to use a tree because I think trees are so wise and old, and they're just not worried about the minutiae that I stress about. Or it could be the sky, or looking down from a hilltop, or, you know, feeling the breeze on your face, looking out to sea. So there's so many different options.
And we've actually not done inviting the community to share a sort of imagery thing before. So why don't we turn back to our lovely community and say, well, what comes up for you as an image to represent the wisdom? Feel free to share it in the chat. So Gandalf, my boyfriend, a barn owl, Oprah, the sea, waves, my grandma, my cat, dolphins, water, an eagle, an oak tree, the Buddha, my cat, the moon, roses, stars, my old school, sunbeams, a tree, a waterfall, my son, bodies of water. Wow, this is beautiful. And actually very much in line with some of the examples you gave. How do you feel as you see the list, Lee?
Oh, it's really moving, actually. You know, I feel really moved reading those, and, you know, just that sense of care and compassion. And just, you know, if you imagine if we were being guided by elephants, I saw my old pony, you know, if we're being guided by rainbows and waterfalls, how great would that be if we're engaging with that part of ourselves? I just feel like it's going to bring something amazing if you let that part of yourself act as the compassionate leader.
Well, what came up for me was Yoda from Star Wars, which I think probably says more about the fact I grew up as a boy in the 70s. But of course, Yoda is a sort of, you know, wise teacher, but with a real sense of humor and playfulness, and who always kind of sees a different perspective and so on. So I think probably what I'd be leaning to would be my inner Yoda, especially at times of tension, just to sort of shake me up with a bit of a humorous response. So thank you for giving me that image. And thank you to all of you for sharing that in the chat, and lovely to see these still coming through. Jesus, my mum and dad, nature, Simba from the Lion King, dappled sunlight through the trees. I love that. Lee, this has been amazing. We've done some mindfulness practice. We've talked about the power of 10 minutes. We've been through your GROW framework, and maybe I'll ask you just to recap that for us in a moment. And we've really tried out each of those 4 steps. So I feel like it's been a really beneficial and experiential time. And in a moment, I'd love to come to the questions that people will no doubt have. So if you haven't already, and you do have a question for Lee, please use the Q&A function, and you can also vote on each other's questions to raise those up the list. But before we do that, Lee, do you want to just do a very quick recap of GROW so we can try and make sure it's in our minds to use?
Definitely. And of course, you don't have to do it in that order. You know, it's a sort of cyclical process that you go round and round and pick the one step that you need on any day. But we just like the acronym. So G is your inner guide, so what matters. R is ready for action, so it's taking steps in the real world. It's making decisions about what can I do that's going to move me towards a value. Then O is taking a moment to observe inside and out, and just notice what's important, what's going on, what your reactions are, and how you can respond to them in a helpful way. And then W is your wise mind, and bring up your image of whoever's the most wise part of you, and let them support all the other parts who might be struggling for all kinds of complex reasons, but just let the wise part be the one who maybe makes the caring final decisions about what's the most helpful way to deal with whatever problems you're facing.
I'm really struck by that word complex, actually, because what came up when you talked about the wise examples was that there's so much nuance and subtlety and sort of things we hold in tension. And just an example this week with the death of the Queen, I was reminded by somebody about this idea that you can hold both grief and gratitude at the same time, and they're both understandable emotional responses to something, and they're different feelings, but they can coexist, and perhaps it's quite natural when that happens. And I think there were so many times when we want to sort of almost like pigeonhole ourselves into a particular thing, and in fact actually what we're really experiencing is a mixture of excitement and worry, or calmness and anticipation, and they're it's that subtlety, I think, that comes back to your awareness, doesn't it?
It is. And then that making room to actually, I can have all of this stuff and it's okay. I can find some room for it and still behave in a way that works for me in my life. I can make choices that are helpful and I can still follow my values. And I think holding on, I sometimes talk about putting our emotions, put them in a backpack. So we keep them close, but we don't let them stop us making choices and going in a direction that feels really meaningful.
Well said. Well, before we close this evening, I'd love us to sort of talk about some of the ways in which people can follow up with other resources that you have. But let's come to people's questions, because we've been listening to me for long enough and there's some fantastic things here. Julie's just asked, how can I observe my negative thoughts but not take heed of them? And I guess what she's sort of saying is, how do we tune into those feelings without being overwhelmed, I guess? What would you say to that?
So that's what's called cognitive diffusion, is a technical term for that. And what it means is having the thoughts but not getting stuck to them, so that they're sort of velcroed in front of you and that's all you can see. It's like going from big screen to shrinking your thoughts down so that they're still playing, but they're just on your mobile phone, in a little funny little voice, rather than them being like big screen surround sound and feeling really overpowering. And sometimes just imagining that they are on your phone and scrolling, or imagining that they're like annoying pop-ups on the computer, and you might not be able to stop them popping up. You can scroll past. If you're on social media and you find something that's kind of a bit, you could weigh in and start arguing with it, or you could just go, do you know what, I'm scrolling past today. And the other way to do it is just to literally label it. So just say, I'm having the thought that, oh, hello thought, it's a thought. And not trying to argue necessarily with the thought, but it's just naming it. I'm having the thought, I'm having worries today.
Thank you. I think that's so important, that naming. And it links to this next question from Kerry, which I think you've partially answered, but it's particularly, how do we quieten the voice of the inner critic? So particularly when you get that, you're not enough, you're not good enough, you've got this wrong, you've made a mistake. How do we deal with that particular sort of voice when it arises?
So my approach is to thank the inner critic, to hear them, and to really actually do some work around what is that critic wanting, because they're actually often motivated by really wanting us to do well and wanting us not, they may be a bit perfectionist, and maybe they're a bit young, and they think that we can get it all right, and if we don't, and they're trying to motivate us, but they're doing it all stick, and no carrot, and not kind of being and you can imagine, if you are going through a really tough place, who would you want on your side? Would you want to have the one going, come on, why are you making such a mistake? Or do you want the supporter? And so the things that we can do is, the first thing to do is to grow the compassionate voice, is to actually engage with your wise part and actually make some room to listen to what your inner Yoda, to your rainbow, to, you know, what would that part have to say, and remembering that what they don't do is end up a really sort of big argument and telling the critic that they're wrong. What they might say is, it sounds like you really care about getting this right, and I can hear how much that matters to you. And you know what, I really appreciate that effort that you bring, wanting us to get everything right. And, you know, and I can feel that it feels so painful. And, you know, when it feels like it isn't going as you wanted it to do. And I want to just say, I get that. And I know it's painful. And I'm here for you. I'm going to be here. I'll support you. We'll do our best. But we also have to be realistic about, we can't be perfectionist. We can only do what we can do. We can do our best. And that's what I'm here to try and guide us to be more reasonable. So it's
I really love
yeah.
this, Lee. I think I've never really heard this said quite so clearly before. So instead of sort of ignoring our inner critic, we're thanking our inner critic and really sort of, instead of arguing with it, sort of letting it make its point and then moving on in a way. And I think that's incredibly profound, actually. Thank you. It's, again, related but different angle from someone called CK here. How would you describe the importance of self-care to someone who believes that it's self-indulgent?
Yeah, so, well, you know, working with health professionals, they're often actually very poor at remembering that they need to care for themselves first. And so I have this conversation quite a lot about, you know, this idea of, am I selfish? And it's, you go back to the whole thing about oxygen, put your own oxygen mask on first, like in a plane, which we kind of hear quite a lot. But the reality is that, you know, there's a strength. What I always say is that I believe self-compassion and self-care creates strength, and it helps us to become like a really strong tree with a strong trunk, so that when the winds blow, we're able to be stable and actually offer support and care for everyone around us and be a shelter. So actually, as we grow ourselves and you know, feed ourselves and water us if we're a plant, and have sunshine and do all the things that make us thrive, so that we grow into this amazing tree that can offer so much to so many, then, you know, unless we have that, that's the only way that we're going to be able to do it. And then we can contribute so much if we can do it. So that would be my version of how to have that conversation.
And in terms of conversations about self-care, someone who I think is called Kishita, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right or not, apologies if not. Really great question. How do you create more awareness about self-care, especially for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, or for whom those for whom self-care is not really the first priority? You know, so I think especially right now, if people are sort of struggling to get life's essentials in order, you know, there's a lot of people choosing between heating and eating and so on. How can you bring self-care into that conversation?
And this is where I would really go back to grow, because if you go back to values and say, what do you care about to the person? You know, what do you actually care about? Maybe they have kids, maybe, you know, they have a relationship, maybe they care, you know, what do they care about? And what then would be a micro step that would enable them. So if it's family, for example, then maybe it's spending 5 minutes reading with one child, and it's not going to solve the heating bill problem. It doesn't assume that, but yet connection is incredibly important for well-being no matter what. And if we lose that because we're so worried about all of life's problems, and we lose our connection with our loved ones, I don't feel that that's going to help us cope in the face of all the problems that we're dealing with. So I really believe it's going back to values, finding out what people care about, and then just encouraging micro steps.
Yes, and I loved how you made the point that grow is something you can use in a sort of circular way. You can come back to and go back through the steps again. Hallie has said, I'm trying to heal my, in quotes, inner child who was affected by trauma, and this impacts my relationship with myself, which in turn makes self-care harder for me. Do you have any advice on how I can approach this? I think it's a really important question. Thank you, Hallie.
Yeah, and you know, so I think it is completely possible to find ways to care for ourselves whilst also caring for the part and when we've had an experience of trauma. And so I worked with somebody who had trauma, and she used a lovely imagery when she was feeling distressed. She would imagine the part of herself that was feeling distressed. She had children, and she would imagine that part in a sling, like the baby sling that you wear, where you put the baby in the sling really close to you, and just hold it really close because that part who's experienced the trauma is just feeling shamed, blamed, isolated, disconnected, and needing to feel connected. So I think self-compassion, there's some really good evidence that self-compassion is very healing for trauma. And so I think it's finding ways to relate to ourselves with acceptance and allowance and kind of a sense of care, and we can change our relationship with that part. So again, we can't exclude the part really needs us. So we need to find a way, if we can, to offer that part a sense of connectedness and sort of, I'm here for you. I know this is tough. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to blame you.
Beautifully put, and very moving again. And also on a slight aside, but made me smile, Paula has just put in the chat, would you like to be my GP? I'd love to be greeted by you if I went to the doctor. Well said, Paula.
Oh, thank you, Paula.
Yeah, I'm going to come to a question from Joshua, who's a dear member of our Action for Happiness team, been a long-standing supporter of our whole movement, and as a great friend. And I like this question because it links to what I think is a real strong feeling in this community, not just about self-help and self-care, but how to bring these ideas to others. And Joshua's just said, do you have any tips on how to support friends and family who are struggling but are resistant to these kind of ideas?
Yeah, so it might be, we sometimes want to convince people, and sometimes if people are resistant, then actually we might need to go back to, what do I need to do for myself to make myself available to support these people? So just thinking, if you go back to this idea of, I've got friends and family who I'm worried about, then that sounds like that's a value of family, friends, connection. It also sounds like a value of contribution. It sounds like values of care, of, wanting to be able to help. And actually, it's just noticing, okay, I'm really having the urge to want to help people, and they're struggling. So can I increase my connection with them? It might not be that you fix them, but actually you find a way to connect with them, and maybe they'll then be able to have a conversation with you that feels, or maybe it's just, asking them, what do you care about? What are you about? What are they? And having that conversation about, well, what matters? Because I think even if that's just down the very first step of grow, like that sense of what matters, that can really help for people to think about what their next steps might be. So I think it's trying not to push too hard, because I do a lot of teaching for health professionals who often want to help patients, and actually I often say it's like less is more. What you're trying to do, you're not trying to make people get better, you're encouraging self-efficacy. You want people to make choices for themselves. And so what we're trying to do is discuss these ideas, but not to try and think that what's going to work for someone else.
Thank you. It's a really, really important question and a really helpful answer. I'd like to move towards the resources that we can potentially share as a result of this. So in a moment, I'll just mention what we're going to send around tomorrow following this. But just last question from Erica, which relates to this. She said very honestly, I'm having a difficult time defining my values, and then I feel a bit guilty for not having any. Do you have any suggestions? So I think one resource that could be helpful is, like, are there lists or surveys that can help us tune into that question of what really matters to us?
Yeah, there are, there's lots of, if you look, there are lots of lists. It may be there's lots of reasons why people might be struggling. It might be that your critic, your inner perfectionist is kicking in and going, well, it's got to be exactly right, and make sure you don't. And so it might be that. It might be a little bit of just, wow, they all sound so great, I don't know which one to choose. So I would say, don't worry too much about getting it right, whatever that means, and just pick something that feels a little bit relevant to you, and and try it out, experiment with it and see how it feels to connect with that through action. And if actually it doesn't feel very satisfying, then it's like go back around the cycle and think, oh, what didn't that work for me? What do I need a bit more of? And actually do it through the process of experimentation. I often feel like we believe we ought to know in advance what to do. And that's the anxious mind kicking in, saying, I need to be sure before I do it. And I need to be exactly knowing how the world's going to turn out. And the reality is, who knows, what's going to work on any day. We have to live with uncertainty all the time. So in many ways, it's just have a go and be willing to not be quite right. And that doesn't mean you've got it wrong. It just means we can evolve and develop.
Thank you, Lee. We're unfortunately running out of time. So I wanted to mention your fantastic book, which I think is called 10 Minutes to Better Mental Health. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
I know you've got some resources for practitioners and some for young people, but that's the sort of mainstream book. So we'll send a link to that out tomorrow. But I wanted to invite you to share something else that I know is a free resource you have on Insight Timer. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's some mindfulness practices. They're all short. They're nearly all under 10 minutes, I think. No, I don't think there's one that's more than about 12 minutes. And there's a range of noticing, some noticing practices. There's kind of a peaceful place one. So they're all freely available. You just need to sign up to Insight Timer, but it's completely free if you can stream it. And it's just a sort of a gift to people. As a way of connecting with some very brief mindfulness practices.
Great. Well, I look forward to sharing that with everyone who's part of this event and also checking them out myself. Lee, this has been a wonderful session together. I'm seeing so much love and appreciation in the chat. I'm very grateful to everyone who's been here and contributed so much and taken part and shared all those really moving and personal insights. So thank you to everyone, but particularly thank you to you, Lee, and your work is really great at bringing life-changing ideas into a very practical format. So I wondered, before we leave, is there any final thought you'd like to leave us all with today?
Oh, I think it's really just being authentic doesn't mean not having difficult stuff. It means just noticing what's going on and then being willing to connect with making some real choice in the world and taking tiny little steps to do things that you care about as an individual. So we all get to choose. And I just want to say, somebody earlier mentioned that their vision for the Wise Mind was a patchwork quilt, and that just really jumped out at me, because I love this idea that life is like this big patchwork quilt or a big knitted jersey I sometimes talk about, full of these tiny, in each stitch or each little square, and they're not all square either. Some of them are a bit sort of wonky if you're me, because I'm not great at sewing. And actually it's this beautiful pattern that comes through complexity, and that's back to this idea of complexity. And so we just need to get that joy of tiny little squares and not expecting it to be all neat and tidy, but actually just really enjoying growing it and experiencing life through it.
Well said. What a lovely note to finish on. Lee, thank you so much for your time today and for all of your work and for sharing that with us all so freely. Very grateful, and look forward to following your next steps and staying in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, everyone. See you again next time.